Have you ever gotten bad dating advice from a friend? Maybe sometimes, you might have somebody give you advice and they might tell you to try to make the other person feel jealous or play hard to get. But in those instances, sometimes those things backfire. And then you start to wonder, is that person actually in alignment with what I want? Is that friend actually true to me? And if you're somebody that has visions and goals, you want to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with good people. Because if you think about it in business, you want real and authentic connections. Your network actually sometimes becomes your social life. So it started to get me thinking, is networking the new dating? So our topic for today is basically alignment. We are going to delve into compatibility, connection, and influence. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Alia & Co., the podcast where we talk about complex things and we break them down. I am your host, Alia Kizelbash, and we have a guest here today that knows a thing or two about alignment. Andrew Gunderman, welcome.
Thank you.
Andrew is a special kind of dude, I will say. He is Inno's top 25 under 25, which is insane. I mean, you've had some interesting experiences. You dropped out of college. You raised venture capital at the age of 21. You had a company that was regulated by the SEC. You've had multiple. You're a serial entrepreneur. Genesis was one of your companies that got acquired. And then you have Renowned right now that is one of the largest content and influencer communities in the US, which is so amazing. Wow, right? And so before we get into alignment, I do want to talk about, there has to be a level of creativity to balance out that systematic, need to kind of create these companies, right? Tell me how, you've used connection in this capacity. How did you start this? How are you using creativity? What is that lens like?
Yeah. I mean, I think the funny thing with a lot of the community building stuff is it's analogous to building businesses in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's understanding incentives, understanding what people actually want. I think when a lot of people build communities, they might be creative with the events that they're doing, but they're missing the crux of what people actually want in a lot of cases. And for me, in a lot of cases, my thesis is that people always want to meet someone who is more successful than them at what they do. And then if you just provide some creativity around that with a really unique venue or a really unique story. So some of my events have been private boxes at White Sox games or the Cameo headquarters or really cool spaces where you're not going to have access to them unless you know people.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff is really special. It's creative. It allows, especially for Renowned, my content creator community, it allows the creators to be more creative because it's just a venue where they can just make awesome content. And it's not it's forced. And their incentive is to make content. And their incentive is to meet one another and to collaborate on content. And so creative venues like museums, private boxes, stuff like that works all together.
Yeah. I think that I want to delve more into that side of you as I know we were having a conversation before. You are the youngest of 6 siblings. And, I like the story. It was, you were, you wanted to be the best, what was it, a skateboarder or what I think it was a soccer player.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, my son plays, so that's why. So no, the thing is, but that's the thing is though, you were teaching yourself and you're the youngest. So I wanted to understand how you, that vision had to start very young.
Yeah.
That is a mindset that is very different than most. And then from you and your history of okay, I'm going to be this and I know that I'm going to do this and I'm just going to do it. And I'm going to drop out of college because I find that there's better opportunity. This is an opportunity, in the crypto space. I want to now connect people. That requires a certain amount of creativity. So how were you always that way? Were you somebody that always questioned, no, why are we doing it this way?
Yeah. I've always been very anti-authority. You can ask my parents about that one. I mean, even from a young age, there were certain moments where I was just awful as a kid because I did not like any kind of authority. And I think I've always been a relatively creative person. I remember writing short stories when I was young. And I like actually made up like a whole language for one of the books that I had written as a kid.
So you're like the Tolkien of.
Yeah, literally. Like, it was like some like fantasy stuff, and I've always thought that stuff was super interesting.
Mhm.
Which I guess kind of maybe that leads to all of my civilizational ambition of wanting to be important to
Mhm.
like humanity, and maybe that is impactful on my long-term vision and why I do things, how I do them. Um, but yeah, I think I've always been a relatively creative person.
Mhm.
I unfortunately never had like any kind of artistic skill set for the most
You
part.
invented a language. Can you
Yeah.
speak in that language or?
No, it was mostly like written language.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So I mean, that was years ago, so I don't remember most of it. But
Mhm.
every now and then I'll like go home and I still have the binders where I created all of that stuff. And I remember making like maps they were like the maps for my story that I was writing.
Mhm.
So that was fun times. But I do think a lot of that has kind of led to, I think you need to be creative to be able to solve problems.
Mhm.
And if you're going to be successful in life at anything, it is about solving people's problems. That's how wealth comes to you, is by solving problems that are painful for people.
Mhm.
Same thing in politics, which I'm involved in. Same
Mhm.
thing with creator content. It's making content that no one else is making about something that is helpful or funny or helps someone escape a painful part of their life or
Mhm.
something like that.
I just want to keep go. I mean, that's fascinating because inventing a language, writing that's definitely creative. I mean, I think that most people conventionally think that art, you have to, that's creativity, et cetera. But, I mean, certainly you have to look at problems and kind of like look at them outside of the box
Mhm.
to look at maybe new ways that you can provide a solution. What was it like one of your first ideas? Do you remember when you were a kid? Like were there certain problems that you would look at and just very innately be like, oh, you know what? I wonder if we could do it that way.
I mean, I think a lot of the problems I solved in the early days were just things I had myself. Like my first idea and one of the first things I had built was I was a young person just in the middle of nowhere, and there were literally no opportunities anywhere.
Ohio, right?
Yeah,
And a
small town
farm.
Ohio. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the funny joke I make is not only was I from the middle of nowhere, I was like I lived in the middle of the middle of nowhere because I didn't even live in my small town.
Uh-huh.
I like lived out in the country.
Mhm.
And so like no neighbors for miles, nothing going on. I
Mhm.
just lived on a farm. There's like farms everywhere around me too.
How would you get to school?
There were like buses, like
Okay.
public buses. But that was like the extent of it. And yeah, that was a terrible experience in my personal opinion. I always wanted to go to the big city. But yeah.
That's fun. I mean, in a sense that you got to the big city,
Hmm.
but I think that sometimes you have to. It's like a Buddhist sort of, a philosophy where they say it's like you don't know freedom unless you've had captivity.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I think
and I
it
wouldn't say you were captive,
Yeah, well,
but
I would. Well, I think it's like it builds an ambition and it builds a desire to go out and do things. And I think that's like the funny thing is you have a lot of like wealthy parents who will spoil their kids. And that really is something you learn is I remember thinking distinctly when I was starting some of my first companies that I wish my parents had like forced me to do some things a little bit earlier. Because I remember like trying to figure out a credit card and
Mm.
being like, I feel like this is something I should have like already learned
Right.
how to use.
Yeah.
And like I didn't even know what a credit score was
Mm.
early. And when I needed that for business stuff, it was just like all these things I had to like kind of figure out that I wish had been enforced upon me from a younger age,
Mhm.
would have been so much more useful.
But it sounds like, I mean, especially dropping out of college, you went to Ohio State,
Hmm. Yeah.
and so you're there. That's a very different kind of environment than, say, the area that you were raised in.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Trying to figure out a credit card is one thing. I think that as a baby adult, I think when you're 18, I think you're a baby adult
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to use a credit card, navigate a bank account, understand that you need to feed yourself and
Mhm.
go get some groceries and whatnot. And so in that way, it is some format of learning that you need to do yourself, right? But then you go into crypto,
Mhm.
and then SEC regulated company. You learn fast, I think.
Yes, that
So
was
tell us about that.
yeah, that was a fun like one of my first really serious companies.
Hmm.
I will say I distinctly remember a period where I was like 18 or 19 or somewhere around that age, where I remember like knowing really smart people and just feeling so much dumber than them and being like, I don't know why I don't feel as smart as them. And it's funny because after years of running several different companies and making a lot of progress in a lot of areas, I now look at a lot of people my age. I'm like, actually, no, I'm way smarter than them. But it's like it came from the trying things and the learning things and the being forced to do new things that I hadn't done before. And yeah, with crypto, I've always had an interest in the financial ecosystem and how the global financial system works. And so kind of delving into that led me into crypto and the reasons for why Bitcoin was created. And it just seemed obvious to have some kind of ETF-like product out there, and that wasn't a thing. And so I decided to go build it. And then the figuring out the legality of that was crazy. And with a very hostile SEC, that was even crazier. But that was a great experience. I'm happy I had that. But
Yeah.
getting through the regulatory process as a 21-year-old was just the most crazy thing ever.
Yeah, because most 21-year-old, I mean, they're just figuring out their credit score, right? So I think that you jumped, you boosted, but at the same time, I know that you mentioned when it comes to not feeling kind of smart enough, right? I mean, in my mind, as an entrepreneur, when I find someone that can challenge me in a domain that I know a lot about, and you kind of become complacent in some ways where you're like, okay, I just want to explain that I have to keep explain tax, right? I have to explain all the time that it actually, when I do come across somebody that knows more than me when it comes to tax, I'm like, oh my God, this is such an exciting, I'm happy to be a part of this situation. Do you find that that's kind of like, the opposite? Because I feel of what where initially you were, but now you're finding you want to surround yourself with people that are more elevated than you because you aspire to, learn from them. Is that something that you're finding? And what was that turning point for you?
Yeah, I mean, so when I had built Genesis, so Genesis was primarily targeting earlier stage founders, and it was very successful and awesome. But one of the big learning lessons from that was a lot of the outcomes that come from something like that, because you're dealing with a lot of people with less leverage because they're earlier stage in their careers, earlier stage in building a company. So there's like the whole trope of don't put someone else's gas mask on or oxygen mask on until yes
Yeah, right.
yeah
Gas
until
mask.
yeah, I meant oxygen. Yeah, don't put someone else's oxygen mask on before you put your own on. And I think it's the same thing in business and in life. So you can't really help anyone else unless you have got yourself taken care of.
Absolutely.
And so that was kind of one of the big things I realized with Genesis was I needed to go up market. And I needed to target people that were more successful, that number one, selfishly, I could learn from, but also they could help each other more. And like that's when you really start having crazy outcomes over time, is when you have a bunch of high leverage people put together in a bunch of different spaces, and then they're investing in each other, starting companies together, hiring each other. Then you end up with really, really cool things, and you start building an actual ecosystem and a real community of people. And if you can do that kind of with people that are high leverage in the center of a niche like a Chicago, then you can end up with massive impacts politically, culturally, from business as well. Like all of it plays together.
No, I think that's an interesting concept for perhaps maybe somebody young that is looking to build a business and maybe and create impact, right? Create that $1 billion company, whatever. I think that the dreams are, we shouldn't limit ourselves when it comes to that. But kind of pulling back that velvet curtain, right? If you think about it, for someone that is 18, 19, that wants to be something big when they grow up, right? What does it look like? They're not in these rooms, and I think that maybe just to paint a visual of what the conversations in that room look like, what those individuals are looking for. They're looking for people that inspire them as well, right? Why would somebody that is interesting want to hang out with somebody mediocre if you think about it? So I'd love to kind of hear about like at least your what you saw in terms of kind of like that journey. Did you see that people that are in those spaces what does that look like?
I mean, eventually you realize the people that are in the really powerful rooms in a lot of cases are not that smart. Uh, they're just normal people in a lot of cases. They've worked a few extra years than you, and maybe there's some aspect of luck on it, or they built a certain business. But in a lot of cases, I think you eventually just realize really successful people are pretty similar to ordinary people. They do think differently though, and they spend their time differently. And like, you're not going to get a mega A player in a room with a bunch of like B players.
Right.
Like at one of my last events, we had one of the biggest Chicago entrepreneurs in the room. And it was funny because something people kept remarking to me is like, how do you get this guy to show up? He doesn't go to anything. And like the key is, well, you get him by surrounding him with other really accomplished people. And you get a bunch of A+ players together. And then it's actually valuable for him to show up. And it's like the reason he doesn't go to anything else is because it's not curated.
Right.
And it's just a bunch of random people. That's where it's really important to be niched and valuable.
Yeah.
And also, like, it's so funny. This is so obvious, but if you want more success in life, just be as valuable as possible. You know, like just having these networks has gotten me into some crazy rooms that I never would have expected to get this early. I've always been very ambitious, so I thought I would get into them eventually. But I mean, I thought stuff to do with like the mayoral race, which I'm involved with, I thought that would take like 10+ years to get involved with that. I mean, literally within like a year of actually serious network building, I'm already there, which has been crazy. But it just comes from being valuable.
Being valuable. But I think also is to will it into your, it's not even the manifestation. I feel like sometimes that's a buzzword. It's like if you really want something, you just make it happen. You just do it, you know? And I think that when it becomes and appears to you, that is something that, you know, just is there and it becomes, it materializes. I want to move back a little bit because I know that you're talking about sometimes like even in, I'm not saying that particular room, but, you know, sometimes in these spaces you find people that are not the smartest, you know, not the sharpest tool in the shed. Like, I mean, and I would say Obama, he like kind of like created this example of like, you know, when he got into law school, it's like you realize you get to law school, you're like, oh my gosh, so, you know, whatever. But there's some stupid people there. You know, you go to Harvard, you realize there are, you know, you think everybody's smart. There's some stupid people there. When you get into the White House, you know, there are also some stupid people there. You know, you're sitting in the Oval Office. There are also some stupid people there. So it's like, you know, there's always, and not to say that people are stupid. I'm sure that, you know, there's a reason they're in that room to begin with. But there's a range, right? In my experience, I feel like, you know, in certain rooms, people will talk about other people, and that kind of is not as elevated of an experience. But I've noticed in rooms that are impactful, they're talking about ideas.
Yeah.
And, you know, have you found that that's something that you see? What are the kind of conversations that are happening?
I mean, it's definitely a lot more about ideas or realities of the world. You know, it's people talking about like, oh, here's what's happening in Ukraine and here's what we're doing about it behind the scenes or something like that. It's a lot less gossipy. It's a lot less focused on random things. Like I think something that's really interesting is a lot of these people that I hang out with are successful entrepreneurs. And something that's interesting about entrepreneurs is most entrepreneurs will work most hours of the day, but some are wildly successful and some aren't. And the big differentiator is what they focus on and what they spend time on. And that manifests in these rooms when you actually have conversations with them where they're talking about the right things. And in a lot of cases, it's the business model or it's stuff going on in the world that's relevant to them, like tariffs or whatever, and how they're dealing with it or how someone else is dealing with it. But it's not a bunch of random voodoo BS.
Right.
It's targeted and specific and useful.
Right.
You know?
And I think that it is certainly, there's a big difference. There's a big difference. And I'm sure that you've probably experienced it too. Sometimes you think that you're in the right room, like, oh, I went to a conference, everyone here is prop tech. Or, you know, I went to a conference and there's a bunch of, you know, VCs that, you know, I can kind of learn from, synergize with. But then, you know, sometimes there's a little bit left to be desired, right? And so how did you realize that, you know what, this looks like the right room, but it's not?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing I realized early was, this sounds so bad, but like, in most cases, just like the average person is by definition average. And there are always average people in everything because there's always an average. And so like in VC, there are a bunch of average VCs in startups, a bunch of average startup founders. In politics, a bunch of average elected officials. And you just have to figure out who is average and who is above average. And then you can curate your own rooms from there. Like a lot of the people I've seen that are wildly successful have crazy networks. And it's just because they surrounded themselves with people that were wildly accomplished, that were very competent, very knowledgeable. And I think that's super important. And I will say that's been one of the most impactful things of my life is just surrounding myself with people that are way more successful than me because the conversations change, how you learn changes. Like I would argue, I've been building companies for like, you know, 6 or 7 years or however many years. I've learned more in the last year from being surrounded by people that are wildly successful than I learned from like even 6 years of building my own stuff because you just learn better fundamentals and you start to see how things work from people that have done it for like 20 or 30 years.
Right.
And it changes everything. It's one of the most high leverage things I've done in my
No,
life.
absolutely. But I will say this, that you have to be somebody that they find worthy of sharing their time with. Do you think that as a young entrepreneur, you dropped out of college, you found this opportunity, and you're like, I'm going to do this. Was there anybody in your life that was like, somebody that you were like, oh, wow, okay, this person's doing it? Maybe there was a mentor or somebody that guided you. Was there someone in your life where you were like, I want to be like this. I have so much respect for this person. Like how, is there somebody that you would find you could pinpoint it to, or is it just kind of like, a general kind of, as you elevate, you just happen to find people gravitate towards you that are like that?
Yeah. I mean, there was a very successful entrepreneur I met at a young age.
Mhm.
He was the most impactful for me. But beyond that, I think for the most part, it's just been a little bit of looking at certain online figures.
Mhm.
But for the most part, I think it's just, I've always been of the mindset that I need to be great and
Yeah.
I need to be extraordinary and I need to do big things. And I'm obsessed with like civilizational level impact. I
Mhm.
want to impact humanity. I don't want to just like, I look at every century, we always remember a few names. Like there's always a few names that have just outsized crazy impact.
Mhm.
And if I can, I would really like to be part of that conversation. Like one of the most impactful people of the century type thing. I
Mhm.
would really like to do that. Um, and it's hard to find any good examples of that in a lot of cases, or at least examples that you have any kind of reach to because they're so outsized in their impact. So for the most part, I think it's just been like pure ambition for a long time and some negativity of, I have certain people that I've been in my life before who were just very negative and did not believe. And you get some real FU energy from those kinds of
Yeah,
people. So
yeah. But I think that perhaps maybe there comes a time as an entrepreneur. You mentioned that at the age of 21, having to deal with at a young age the government, and I'm assuming, and I'm pretty sure, is that that first experience of having to have that kind of a burden was extreme, right? And so that was kind of like a crash course in regulating your emotions, emotional intelligence, also your inner peace, right? How does that look now? I mean, you realizing that, and me too, like honestly, you cut out certain people that just don't belong. If there's somebody that's negative in your space, why would you allow them in your space?
yeah, it took me a long time to realize that it's okay to not like people, or to not like certain people, or to just cut certain people out. Especially, I think I had to relearn this over the last few months too, weirdly enough, where I had learned it a few years ago. And then I think when I started really building my network, sometimes things would get too political, where you're like, oh, I don't want to like damage this relationship because it's like a part of my circle and all these things. I think eventually, though, it's just, especially lately, it's been a thing of like, if I don't like you, I don't like you, and you're not getting invited to stuff, and I'm
Right.
excluding you from everything, and
Right.
I don't really care.
Yeah.
And I think that requires some level of self-esteem, which I think luckily I have for the most part. But that's something I have to keep relearning over
Yeah.
time.
And I will say it's about priorities because I think that sometimes people think they need to people please, they need to be account. And yes, of course, you be nice to people, etc. But at the same time, who has been through everything that you've been through but you,
Yeah.
right? So who do you think you should put first?
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times in society, we're putting everybody else before us, and especially if you have a vision, right? And you do. So,
Well, and being extraordinary, by definition, if you're going to be an extraordinary person, you have to be contrarian.
yeah.
Like it doesn't make any logical sense to be someone with an outsized impact on the world who does the same thing as everyone else. And so you have to be eventually comfortable with saying F you to some people
Right.
and be comfortable with some people disagreeing with you and people not liking you. Like there is no possible way to become super impactful where everyone loves you. Like that's just never going to happen.
Right.
And I think the sooner you realize that and the sooner you become okay with that, the better it is. And I do think that is something you probably have to consistently relearn. I've had to relearn it twice. I expect I'll have to relearn it again in the future.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, I 100%. And I think that that's such an interesting experience, relearning it over and over again. Was there one particular kind of, at least your first Because I think it requires a certain amount of emotional intelligence. I think that when you're younger, you're really just trying to survive. You're seeing what's around you. You're trying to do the things. This paper is due. I need to pay this bill. I need to make sure, like, especially if you're, doing that company that you started. I mean, that's a lot of obligation that you're just checking off things that I need to make sure that I'm just surviving, right? But it does take a certain amount of nuance to internalize your own feelings. Was there a particular moment where you were like, I need to think about me? F this. Was there something that you find that might be a profound kind of turning point for you?
Yeah. I mean, I've had a moment like that recently. But I think these are moments you have consistently over time. And in different situations, you have them over and over again. I mean, I think like dealing with crazy government stuff, I was like, okay, at some point I was like, I want to like build companies out of the regulated spaces for a little bit, especially because like not only did that company get regulated and got regulated at a super young age, so there's just like government overhead that you have to deal with in general. But it's also, this was when the SEC was super hostile towards crypto. And so they would try to kill you by like installing a bunch of legal fees on you. And so it was like literally as soon as we got regulated, before we'd even launched a product, we had the full brunt of the government coming at us. And it's like constant calls with SEC examiners. And just, it was like a bloodbath of them trying to kill you using any tool they have. And like I know people that got debanked and like all sorts of crazy stuff that was going on. And it's like that experience. I was like, okay, I want to like not build in regulated spaces for just a little bit of time and like do some stuff in other spaces because that was just so crazy. But I've had that experience with people as well, where it's just like eventually you're like, okay, screw this, like get out of my life. Like I don't want anything to do with you. And I've had that multiple times. But again, I think you relearn that where like you deal with it for a little while and eventually you kind of button up and you're like, okay, no more.
Yeah. So what's a yes in your world?
A yes?
Yeah. What's a yes for someone to come into your world? Like what's a yes?
I think like high integrity, good people is really important.
What's good?
You said what?
What's good?
Good of heart. Give first. I like to come at things from a give first attitude where I think I've given way more than I've received. And I think over time that I'll be paid back tenfold. But I don't do it for the sake of getting stuff back later. It's I want to do good for the world and I feel impactful doing that. And I like other people that come at things with a how can I help you attitude.
Right.
I have met people who the first thing is just like, oh, how can you help me? And I know it's so stereotypical, but I don't like people like that. They come off as very sleazy in a lot of cases. And I try to avoid sleazy people, especially with Renowned. Renowned has been one of those weird things where with the Penthouse community I run, it's very down low. And so the people there are obscenely wealthy, obscenely successful, but you can't take a picture and flex to all your friends because your friends are going to be like, I don't know who the heck that is. But like with Renowned, it's a lot more public facing. And so we've had people trying to sneak past security into events and like I've had like hit pieces online about me and like all sorts of weird stuff come from Renowned. And so it's something I have to protect a little more. And so like sleazy people, we try to stay away from. These networks that are very status based, I'm not a big fan of in a lot of cases. Just good people that are give first, that want to help other people, that want to do good for the world, that are ambitious, hardworking, with some intensity. I like all of that. But I'm not a big fan of people that I deem to have low morals.
So low morals would be a no.
Yeah.
And so, but I think that you're right. Like looking at the parallel between a community where you have established individuals, the Penthouse community, definitely is very different because there's a lot of experience that they've had building. I'm sure a lot of experience, like as in the real world experience with interactions with other humans. But with Renowned, there is an aspect of you have this influencer content creation community that is a little bit more green in terms of business if you're like looking at both in parallel, right? So you're finding that, but there is value there. So what would you say the value is there still creating?
If you can build a centralized community that brings all the wealthy people together, like the Penthouse series, and you can give select companies access to that, you could raise millions of dollars for them. Same with a political candidate. You could do that with donors. Same with Renowned. You can bring together content creators. When everyone says that we have none, I actually have probably one of the most comprehensive lists of creators at this point. And it's hundreds of creators named long. And And there's a lot of creators here, and they have a lot of followers and a lot of influence, and they drive a lot of revenue, and they're doing a lot of cool things. And so I think it's like creators still have a huge impact on culture. I mean, there's a lot of creators that we have that make content about Chicago, and a lot of people that live in Chicago are watching them,
Right.
being like, "Oh, what's going on today? Or what's the news? Or what happened in this political thing? I want to learn more about it." And so a lot of the old media where people got their news from is shifting to the newer sources of media like creators and influencers. And so I think you're kind of seeing a lot of the news narratives being driven by creators, but they're also driving sentiment of cities. So like if all the creators in Chicago are talking about how dangerous the city is, most people are going to have the sentiment that Chicago's pretty dangerous.
Right.
But you could also, on the opposite of that, you could also convince people that Chicago's on the up and up if all the creators are like, oh, the city's amazing. Because creators are way more impactful than old media at this point.
Old media, but then also to be able to get into those rooms of larger impact, the ones that are leading the movements and creating the solutions, right? Like I feel like, so what's interesting is that as I take a step back, I find, since our topic is alignment, I am seeing this high level view of alignment that is happening in all of the things that you're creating, right? You're creating things where, you're fostering this community of elevated individuals that are really making impact, via their companies. But then also at a grassroots level, you have this influencer content creation community to kind of bridge the gap between the general population and those that are doing that. But also, I know that you are working with government, seeing, and you've had these experiences from that individual that was kicking the soccer ball as a young child to starting his first company and now creating space. How did you get here?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of doing things. A lot of the stuff I'm doing now, I never predicted that I would be doing when I was younger. But I think it's just trying stuff, doing stuff. Eventually, as you try more things, you start to find stuff you're good at. Like, I never would have expected that I'm good at community building, but I would argue I'm probably one of the top ones in Chicago.
Yeah.
I think a lot of community builders also say they're building communities, but without a recurring event series or some kind of recurring something where people are constantly seeing each other, you're not building a community. You're just building like an event.
Yeah.
Like it's a one-off.
That one.
And I think building a community is about building an ecosystem of people with leverage that help each other, that do things, like over time. Like one of the guys that I do the Penthouse series with, he's gotten a bunch of people like married at his events. And it's like, that is real community when you have really crazy life outcomes that are coming from that thing over time.
Is he a matchmaker or
What is it?
Is he a matchmaker or is just
And it's
making
just like
connections?
from
Just for
introductions.
fun. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but it's like you have companies that get started, you have investment that happens, you have people that get married, people that start dating. All these things start happening because you actually have a real community. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like I got here from just trying stuff, and I suspect hopefully I will go a lot farther over time. And I've always had a long-term mission that was driving me, and I've always had the same goal for as long as I can remember. I've wanted the exact same thing. And it's just over time, you push and you push, and your methodology of getting to the final goal changes over time, but you make crazy progress, especially if you're really aggressive.
Right.
I think people are afraid to be aggressive, but anyone who's super great in the world, they're always super aggressive.
But then you're mentioning that you've always had a goal. What is that goal? Because it seems that you're creating a very robust kind of system around achieving that goal.
Yeah.
So what would you say that is? And how are you using all of this as leverage to get closer to it?
Yeah, I mean, my long-term goal, and I'll keep it simple, but my long-term goal has always been, I think a lot of the problems in the world that people blame on politics are actually currency system issues. And I would like to help address those issues long-term. I think people play a lot of politics, but it's not going to solve any real issues. I think you have to fix the root cause of a lot of it, which is the currency system. And I mean, to get to that point, you need to be obscenely well connected. You need to be influential in government. You're going to need an outrageous amount of wealth to be able to have any impact at that level. You need to be very educated so you don't mess up the system. And so all of these things, building communities acquires a network for me. I learn a ton from the people I'm surrounded by. Building companies, I can acquire wealth and I can acquire knowledge from that as well. And if I just do those things really well for the next 30 years, then I have a real shot at actually trying to tackle that issue long term.
I love that you're so systematic about it. It's like a roadmap that you have, which is not what most people have when it comes to a goal as large as that, which I believe you will achieve, because I think that if you're compelled to do it, you will, right? But I think that maybe also kind of peeling a layer back, you know, when did you realize it's these communities that you're building? Is there like an aha moment where it's like, whoa, I didn't know that this is actually what's happening, like, is there something that is more to it? Like, so if for, maybe a 15, 16-year-old that is just scrolling on TikTok and sees like a clip of this, what would you say is what's really happening? What's really happening? How do things really get done? And how did you realize it?
It's funny. I'm going to quote someone else who's on your podcast, Chiranjeev,
Yeah.
is a good friend. But this is a comment from Steve Jobs also, but the dots really do only connect in reverse. Like things only make sense when you look back on them. That's why you just have to do things and acquire skills, and you end up having a use for them long term in a lot of cases. Where like these communities, I didn't start building them because I had any thought that this stuff would happen. I mean, like I thought that eventually I would get into these rooms, but I really thought I would be like 30s or 40s before I got to these rooms. There was no way that I expected that I would get to them when I'm like still almost college age. Like I'm right around the age of a lot of college students. And I did not expect to be at this point at that short of amount of time. But it just came from being aggressive and doing stuff and trying stuff. And so it was like, that just happened just because I pushed,
Yeah. It's that the room that people dream of being in, and so no, I
Well,
love.
that's the funny thing I keep thinking about is in terms of like a reach for the average person, I'm like already retired network wise, where like I have like such a good network at this point. It is far beyond what most people will ever have. Uh, but I would like to have more with it. And I would like to do more with it. And I think it's like the long-term potential for these networks. My understanding of it grows as they get bigger and I do more things.
Yeah.
Like with Renowned has been one of the biggest driving forces into me getting connected in politics. And that was not at all what I expected when I started it. Like I actually planned because I have, the Penthouse community, which is more business focused, at least it was. And then I was like, oh, now I'm going to start a creator community and do this in culture and celebrities in Chicago. And then in the next few years, when I'm more well connected in politics, I'll do a political community and do that. But like that has been massively accelerated by Renowned on its own,
Right.
where like Renowned within 7 months hit 150 million followers. And then at that point, is every politician wanted to talk to me.
Yeah.
And it was just like all of that accelerated. And my vision for where that goes within the next year will probably change.
Do you think also, I think in addition to your vision, looking at society also, we're changing the way that we're doing things, I mean, you have some candidates that now they're on social media and the access is so much more where you have perhaps maybe the traditional looking candidate that might not be doing it the way that they can reach the masses. Do you find that that's something that you're seeing, that there's a big shift and maybe you just have a pulse on it?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a huge shift. I think that's where some of this is exciting. Is I didn't even intend to get into some of this, but now that I am and I'm in the thick of it, some of this seems really obvious. Like one of the things that I kind of talked to people about originally when Renowned was kind of on the move was like the last presidential election was a lot of new media. And everybody knows that the old media guard is dying and people don't really pay attention to the cable TV shows and all
No,
these
yeah.
things. Like their viewership is like non-existent. Like
Yeah.
one of my creators does more views on one post than they get like in a whole year.
Yeah.
Like they're totally irrelevant. But a lot of that last presidential election was a lot of new media. It was Joe Rogan, the big podcast, but it was very national. It was like, this is global audience, national audience, not very targeted or local. But one of the big things you learn in business is everything is about local niches. And so extrapolating that to politics, your next cycles, you're going to start seeing heavy influence of local creators for local news and local politics. And I think that's exactly where things are going. Mamdani, who just won the Democratic primary in New York, he's a great example of this. But even he didn't like do a full-fledged strategy on local creators. And I just think that's where the world's moving. And it's kind of a weird position because I'm almost the arbiter of the political access to the creators now, which again was not intentional, but it's kind of happened that way. And I think that's exactly like this next mayor election in Chicago. I'm guaranteeing you there will be heavy influence from like local Chicago creators. And these people are ordinary people, but they're about to become very influential in
Yeah.
the city for politics.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe there might be need to be some format of education? Because, in a reality where we have fake news and, a lot of the stuff that's on social media is just opinions. It could be like, some random person sitting in Kansas, stay-at-home mom that maybe didn't even finish high school, and maybe just might be a conspiracy theorist, who knows, right? Sometimes like there's a massive following for people like that. Do you think that within your community there might be like some kind of like standardization or some effort to kind of or is it something different,
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're gonna find out. Like, I don't really know where things are gonna go. I think I mean, I all I know is my thesis is just that creators are going to become very valuable politically, and I don't think that that's fully been realized yet. But I do think that's exactly where the world is going, especially because I have creators where they are very niched down into local areas like the South Side. Like we have one of the biggest South Side specific creators, and he makes content only about the South Side, and his whole audience is the South Side. And I'm just looking at that, and I'm like, every alderman that is in that area is going to want to talk to him in the next few years and make content with him.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
it's going to be up to him who he wants to work with. And he's going to have a real influence on like voters. And I think it's just like that's where the puck is moving. And we're going to see how many politicians are willing to actually make the change. Because, like if you look at the New York mayoral race, like Andrew Cuomo went nowhere and had no new media at all
Yeah.
and then like got crushed. And it's like this is where things are going, and new social media strategies are going to dominate. And I'm so curious to see how things go. But I do think one thing that's interesting on this topic is I wonder, I would never do this, but I'm wondering if people will start building like media companies for politicians where they have creators on their payroll supporting particular candidates. And it's basically like newspapers, but instead of newspapers, it's like local news through creators. And I kind of see early signs of that with some organizations. And I almost wonder if things will head that direction as well. But we'll
Yeah, I
see.
mean, if you look at the data, I mean, especially with what you're saying, yeah, me personally, yes, you want to see what is accessible to you and what is relevant to you. So I definitely think that that's I mean, it's eye-opening for me because I've never thought of it that way, and I think that that is certainly the case. It's just that my worry would just be like, let's just get the right information out there. But then if you think about it, it kind of falls back to that corporate structure. If it's like if somebody's incentivizing you with a certain amount as a creator, then you'll be incentivized generally. I mean, certain people have their standards of morals or whatever, but do you think that that might be a bad thing or a good thing? Or because with the media, it's like what's fake news, what's sponsored, certain channels are sponsored by, certain that could get messy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be good and bad stuff that
Yeah.
comes out of all of this. I think a lot of creators have really big audiences, but they don't understand anything about the world in some cases. Sometimes people are really educated about the world, but I mean, they're normal people. And so, like, sometimes they're going to be really educated, sometimes they're not, but they're always going to have an opinion. And if they get involved, they can influence things one direction or another and have no idea the impacts of the influence that they have.
Right.
I just foresee a future where they're going to be way more impactful
Yeah.
than people realize. And that's the only thing I'm fixating on. And I think it's like there's no stopping it. I think things are going that direction. That's just where politics is going to head. And it's going to be interesting because currently donors have so much influence because of money. But just like in the startup world, distribution matters and it matters a lot. And I think creators are going to start becoming massively influential in politics and can have a huge difference on the future of cities or nations. And I'm curious to see how that goes.
And only because I think about it, but if you take a step even further back, what about these larger corporations where it's like TikTok or Facebook that might be, they could technically, I mean, hide things,
Yep.
I mean, So do you think that that kind of funnels into this entire kind of a system that we already have in place of kind of this, you're not really sure who's controlling and what's happening. How can you not do that? How can you stay true to what's actually accurate?
Yeah. Well, I think that's like the thing is I'm looking at some of this as a bystander. Like I'll be involved with some of this, but one thing that I'm just a lot of this is going to be out of my control because I'm only involved in some spaces. But one thing I have wondered is I wonder how long until you have like a Microsoft or whoever that starts putting like hundreds or thousands of creators on their payroll that are told to put out certain types of content.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have enough creator, especially in a particular niche, they can flood the entire social waves of the niche with a certain message.
Yeah.
And you could influence public opinion on things in whatever direction you want.
Oh, absolutely.
And people used to do that by, giving lots of money to the big news organizations. Things are more distributed, but there are almost definitely going to be attempts to centralize it. And we'll see if that actually works or not. But there are definitely going to be attempts to centralize it because that's just how humans are.
Yeah. I just hope with, just even AI and even just the way social media works, privacy, our data when it comes to open versus closed data, there needs to be more regulatory standards. And hopefully we go in that direction. And I'm just hearing all of this and I just find that it's very forward thinking because most people, they don't understand that nuanced level of how much impact certain kinds of spaces have, right? But, and just kind of looking at your brain and just to kind of wrap up, you're a very specific subset of a person as an entrepreneur, as a human, right? Being a young child, then deciding that you're doing certain things. What keeps you grounded? Like, how do you keep moving forward? Do you have like a specific morning routine or something like that? Are there specific ideas that you're super passionate about? Do you have protected time where you're being creative? Like, walk us through your day? What does that look like? Because maybe somebody might be like, how do I be like him?
Yeah. I mean, my routine is pretty simple. I don't really want to like fill up the first many hours of my day with things. I mean, it's literally as simple as wake up, immediately go to the gym, and then get to work after that. Obviously after a shower and yada yada. But it's pretty straightforward. It's that. And then depending on the time period of my life, I mean, I might stay at the office till midnight or later, depending on what's going on. But it's a lot of work and something I'm actually testing out recently, which I haven't done as much yet. But I think is important is, like I said earlier, most entrepreneurs will spend most of their time working. The big differentiator is what you spend time on and what you focus on. And one of the big things I've learned from the successful friends I have is a hyperfixation on what is the most important thing I should be doing right now, or what is the big limiting factor in what I'm trying to accomplish, or the big limiting factor in my business, or whatever it is. Like, what's the thing that really matters? That if I fix this, it'll solve most things. And so I try to fixate on that for the first 4 hours of my day. So like from when I get up till like the first 4 hours of work, I want to fixate on that. Like, what is the most high leverage thing I need to do right now? Like, I'm working on getting a new company off the ground. So it's like, what is the most important thing I need to do for that right now? And it's just work only on that for those 4 hours. And then for the rest of the day, if you need meetings, whatever, if you need to do work on other less important stuff, if you need to look at messages, whatever. But I want to continue trying to do that more because I just think that is so important. It's just focusing on what is the most high leverage thing that I can do. Every single really successful person I've talked to has thought about leverage in one way or another because we all have the same amount of time in the day. So it really does come down to what are you choosing to use your time on? And is it something that is helping you? And how much is it helping you? Is it helping you in a dramatic way? Is it not? That's really important.
So I would consider that really good advice for anybody that is trying to move the needle. And especially young people where there's so many distractions, but this is something that you need to prioritize. What do you need to be hyper fixated on to make sure that you're getting to the next level? So I really love that. So how can anybody that is a content creator, influencer, we didn't really talk about Genesis as much, but, I'd love to hear a little bit about that and how also people can connect with you and with those companies that you have. What are you, just kind of how can people jump in to these spaces that you're creating?
Yeah. I mean, all the easy ways to either learn about me or reach out to me is just andrewgunderman.com. So literally just my name.com. Very simple. You'll find pretty much any of the important stuff I'm doing right now. There's like an application form for the penthouse communities, just helps people get on my radar if I want to invite them to things. And then there's the equivalent of that on the Renowned site, which is also tagged from my personal site. So literally everything I'm doing, you can find on my site. And then I'm on, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. Renowned doesn't have any public facing social medias, and that's on purpose because the goal of Renowned is to have it be a personable thing. And so there is no Renowned organization. It's you're dealing with me or you're dealing with my partner because we want it to be person to person, human. And so we probably won't ever do like social media profiles for it.
I like that.
So you just come directly to us if you want to talk about Renowned stuff, and you can do that. My email's public, stuff like that.
Well, there you have it. Andrew, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Very refreshing and a conversation that is elevated for sure. And just like a lot of the things that you're creating right now. So thank you again. Yes. All right. Well, there you have it, folks. Goodbye.